Greetings, travelers. Welcome to another class guide, where I intend to get one thing wrong. Dragoon is a job that has been memed to oblivion. I have also contributed to this. Like many tired jokes, there is a grain of truth to it. The reason why this class is so notorious for dying originated from the olden days of A Realm Reborn, a version of the game with a full second of input delay. This, coupled with Dragoon's long animation locks, meant that trying to stay alive was about the equivalent of bringing a cigarette to a gasoline fight. Thankfully, Dragoon is not nearly as punishing to play as it was in the past. But that reputation is something that haunts this job to this day. In the modern era of Final Fantasy XIV, Dragoon can still get wrecked by its own abilities, just not at the same level as in the past. As far as why anyone wants to pick up Dragoon, you either thought Astinian was cool, you wanted to bring some raid buffs to your group, or you just wanted to know what all the memes were about. I'm going to explain some of the more annoying parts of this class first, so you know what you're getting into, and what you have to pay the most attention to. The first thing I'll explain is animation locks. For those unaware, animation locks are exactly what they sound like. When you use certain abilities, you are unable to move or do anything else until the stylish ability that the animators worked overtime for is complete. This is different from cast times, where you can interrupt casts if you need to move, but for animation locks, you don't get to be half-hearted. You are fully committed to not dodging anything when you use these skills. The vast majority of the time, this does not matter. Especially for normal content, where getting hit by an AoE doesn't outright delete your health bar. However, the higher up you go in the content, Dragoon will have to plan these cooldowns depending on mechanics and fights. Because most avoidable Savage mechanics just outright put you out of your misery. This applies to all of your jumps. This includes Jump, which turns into High Jump when you're at level 74 or higher, Dragonfire Dive, Spine Shatter Dive, and Star Diver. Now, I would not recommend being afraid of these buttons because this is absolutely a comfort thing. The more you play and the more you use these skills, the better feeling you'll get for exactly how long you are locked in place for. And know that this is where I tell you that Jump has a way longer animation than High Jump. So while you're leveling this class, if Jump starts to feel a little bit too long, here's a side-by-side comparison for how much faster it gets. These animation locks are not super long anymore, but sometimes it is the difference between getting a little extra damage and tanking the floor. The other annoying thing is that your jumps will teleport you to the enemy, which is fairly obvious. Unlike other classes where using your dash to enemy skill is typically not mandatory as part of your DPS rotation, although it is usually optimal, Dragoon has to use some of its jumps as part of its damage rotation. Thus, if the boss decides to leave the platform right as you activate your jump, you will fly into the void and end up on the floor. Of course, this is entirely dependent on what content you are running. It's not typical for story dungeons to have bosses hover over the void, but even in normal raids, there might be segments where a boss leaves the platform for a little bit or part of the stage falls away, and using a jump in these cases causes the game to bug out and make you unable to deal any damage, while your character name is grayed out. So oh well, it comes with the job. You will probably die at least once this way, but once you know where this comes up in a fight, just try to avoid making the same mistake twice. Now you know how this class can easily die. It's not as bad as it might seem when I talk about it compared to when you actually play the class, but Dragoon does require a fight-by-fight note sheet for segments that require you to hold jumps to stay alive. And remember that elusive jump will send you back a fixed distance, so be careful not to fling yourself into the Shadow Realm.
Hey, you finally awake. You were trying to watch this video, right? You walked right into that self-promotion ambush.
Yeah, I couldn't mimic the rest of the meme. If you like what I do here, be sure to subscribe. I am setting a goal at 10,000 subscribers where I will do a karaoke live stream right here on YouTube. I know you're dying to see that, so let's get there and we can all sing Baka Mitai together. The growth on this channel has continued to amaze me, so as usual, thank you for your financial support. As for the course, if you plan to take this job into dungeons, always have your AoE rotation on your hotbar. Your AoE GCDs are all ice cream cones in terms of shape, so be sure to position yourself accordingly to hit as many mobs as possible. Dragoon does want to have Blood of the Dragon up even during AoE. I am not going to tell you how to optimize AoE damage, the very short version is that using the first 2 buttons of your single target rotation to get your disembowel buff before AoEing enemies to death is usually a DPS increase. And many of your jumps are also AoE, so you should probably be using them if you want to blender mobs faster. For more information on optimizing your AoE rotation, I'm going to make you look that one up yourself. Alright, to talk about how to single target DPS properly, I'm going to first explain positionals, because the in-game tutorial for this is about as useful as a level 80 healer who doesn't use any damage skills. When targeting an enemy, you're going to get this weird little circle thing around them. This pizza slice in the back that has an empty ring, yeah, that right there, that's the butt cheek positional. So anything that requires a rear positional, you want to be within that pizza slice. You can be right on the edge of the slice and it will still count as a rear. Flanks will apply to both sides of the boss that start from where that pizza slice ends until an invisible part in front of the boss. But that's not really important. If you stand right on the edge of the slice, you can move for positionals very easily just by moving slightly along the edge, going into the slice for rears and just outside of it for flanks. This is the sweet spot and is also the natural habitat of basically all melee DPS players. You might see me hang out on the boss's left side, but that is just a habit from where I stand in my static. There is also a sweet spot on the right side of bosses as well. Unlike when I talked about samurai positionals, Dragoon is one of the hardest punished for missing positionals of all the melee DPS. So getting used to where you need to stand for positionals as soon as possible helps a lot. If you can't find this pizza slice on an enemy, and the circle looks completely full all the way around, then congratulations. That enemy does not have positionals on it, and you will get the positional bonus no matter where you stand around the enemy. This applies to most large bosses that you can't get behind, and everything in the Bosgen Southern Front. Finally, always remember to slap True North when you have a segment where you're unable to get positionals on a boss that normally has them. Alright, I have set you up to finally talk about how to mash buttons on this class. I'm going to mention one particular button here first. Dragon Sight is an iconic Dragoon move, giving you a buff and sharing it with a friend. You have to target another player to give them the buff. If you target no one else, you will still get the same buff that you always do, but you won't be able to share it with anyone else. This isn't even sharing in the traditional sense. Dragon Sight will always increase your damage by 10%, regardless if the 5% bonus is given to another player. So always share the damage buff, because it's just free potency for everyone involved. However, your buddy does have to remain in range of you to keep their buff active. There are a few tricks to this, so I can give you a couple of options for targeting other players. You can just click on the players either in-game or on the character list, which is the shitty way to do it, so that's what I do. If you play on keyboard, you can also use the F keys to always target a specific player in your party based on the number. To ensure that DPS are always at the top of your list, go to Character Configuration, UI Settings, Party List, and look at the Party List sorting and change it so that DPS is always at the top. That way, if you do use this method, you will only ever have to worry about using the first few F keys. You can also create a macro. There are a couple of different options to either target the person who is closest to you, or a macro that you plan to change in every encounter to which you set it to a specific player number to always target them when you use this macro. If you're in a controlled environment where you are always going to plan to eye the same person, the second method is probably best to ensure that you don't mess up, while the first method will require you to be close to whoever you want to buff. These are some of the ways that people deal with this ability. As far as who you tether, targeting any other melee DPS is always the easiest to ensure that the tether doesn't break. The only job to actively avoid would probably be Summoner, because this buff does not make their pets deal more damage. But if you have no other option, I would still give it to a Summoner instead of giving the eye to a non-DPS player. And finally, Dragoon can give eyes to each other. And this is another time where I say, if you really want to know who to tether based on how fat their damage is, you're not going to parse, because it's a violation of terms of service. That should be everything you ever wanted to know about Dragon Sight. As long as you give this buff to someone else, it's better than not sharing it at all. I will also say the reason why I do not personally use macros for this is that macros on DPS classes just scare the crap out of me. I actually do not know what is considered optimal, but the reason why people often use macros for this is it's a lot simpler to just click one button than to have to worry about clicking on party members. I will leave it up to you, but don't come after me if the macro screws up, because I don't know how consistent they typically work. Alright, it's finally time to screw up this opener. I will explain the abilities in more detail later, but this can help you at least understand what all of your abilities are. I will note which ones are your jumps. I also can't wait to read these ability names because, well, you'll see. We begin with what to do before engaging in combat. Don't forget to turn on Blood of the Dragon a little bit before combat, and also sprinting a few seconds before is not a bad idea. Ensure that you are at the back of the boss because your rear positionals will be first. Alright, begin with True Thrust. We now immediately double weave our buffs with Lance Charge and Dragon Sight. Follow this up with Disembowel and then weave Battle Litany. Next up is Chaos Thrust to get our dot up. Ensure that you are at the rear for this positional. After Chaos Thrust, we will use Wheeling Thrust, which is also a rear positional. You will have to move to the flank for our next GCD, which is Fang and Claw. Weave High Jump, which is a jump, after Fang and Claw. As a note, you cannot double weave with jumps, as the animation time will take up all of your weaving time. If you hit all of your positionals correctly, True Thrust will now turn into Raiden Thrust, which we use now. Stay on the flank, because our next positional will also be a flank. We're going to weave Spine Shatter Dive immediately after that Raiden Thrust. Keep in mind this is another jump. Now we use Vorpal Thrust and double weave Gearskogel and Life Surge. Now use Full Thrust, followed by weaving Dragonfire Dive, which is another jump. We now use Fang and Claw, so still be on the flank to get the positional. Weave Mirage Dive while moving to the rear because our next GCD is going to be Wheeling Thrust. Note, Mirage Dive is not a jump, it does not stop you in place. Your combo starter should now be Raiden Thrust after landing that Wheeling Thrust again. And now we go back to our dot combo with Disembowel and Chaos Thrust. And with that, you have completed your opener, and you're ready to learn how to rotate. The core rotation to Dragoon is fairly self-explanatory. Without any off-global cooldowns, we have two different combos. The first is our damage over time combo, which also gives us our permanent DPS buff that we need to maintain. It goes like this: True Thrust, Disembowel, Chaos Thrust, Wheeling Thrust, and Fang and Claw. Our other combo is our damage filler combo, which goes True Thrust, Vorpal Thrust, Full Thrust, Fang and Claw, and Wheeling Thrust. You might notice that Fang and Claw and Wheeling Thrust are used in both 5-button combos, but their order is different. This isn't super hard to remember. Chaos Thrust requires a rear positional, so it is followed by the rear positional with Wheeling Thrust. There is not a positional requirement for our Full Thrust combo, so it starts with the other one, being Fang and Claw. We alternate these combos indefinitely, meaning that while you're doing the static part of your rotation, you start at the back of the boss and move to the flank for your first Fang and Claw. You can then stay on that flank until you use Fang and Claw again, and then move to the back for Wheeling Thrust. It's honestly kind of smart how they designed this. You don't have to constantly flip-flop for positionals. Dragoon is known for this static rotation, as you quite literally always alternate these combos until the encounter is over. What I haven't mentioned yet, though, is how things get messed up. Remember when I said Dragoon is punished hard for missing positionals? When you finish either Chaos Thrust or Full Thrust, and you see that Wheeling Thrust or Fang and Claw is up, if you whiff that positional, the combo just stops dead in its tracks. Not only does the move not deal the full damage, you also completely drop the combo. This prevents you from getting the last piece of your 5-button combo if you screw it up on the 4th one, and will stop True Thrust from turning into Raiden Thrust. This is honestly more emotionally painful than dying to an animation lock, as you are left lost and confused about how this could happen. So just don't mess it up. No pressure. Now you probably think that I really just explained the rotation, so it's time to talk about what cooldowns to keep track of. Yes, it is. So it's time to talk about the last unintuitive part of this class. We're going to have to talk about Life of the Dragon. We have effectively 3 off-global cooldowns that come up every 30 seconds. High Jump, Mirage Dive, since Mirage Dive comes up after you use High Jump, and Gearskogel. How do you pronounce that? Gearskogel? Gearskogel? Gearskogel. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm one of these Americans who struggles to speak English, let alone any other language. Every time you use Mirage Dive, you strengthen your Dragon Gaze. After using 2 Mirage Dives, your Gerskogel will light up. When you use it when it is highlighted, you will now enter Life of the Dragon. There are 2 off-global cooldowns that are available as a result of your Life of the Dragon phase. Gerskogel is immediately replaced with Nastrond, and you have access to your big damage jump, Stardiver. Nastron has a 10-second cooldown, and Life of the Dragon lasts for 30 seconds. Your goal is to get 3 casts of this in before Life of the Dragon falls off. I usually try to double weave that lit up Gerskogel and just mash it like crazy to get my first Nastron in. And anytime during Life phase, you can use Stardiver, so don't forget it. The part that is unintuitive about this is when to go into Life phase. If you executed your opener correctly, it is possible to enter Life phase 60 seconds into combat. However, you will not have any of your buffs up during that time. What is actually optimal is delaying your first Life phase. The way to properly do this is to use Gerskogel before you use Mirage Dive. So you high jump, you then hold on to Mirage Dive until you use Gerskogel, and then you use Mirage Dive. If you use Mirage Dive before this, it will cause you to enter Life phase upon executing Gerskogel. The reason for this delay is so that your first Life phase will be about 20 seconds before your next Lance Charge comes back up. As a result, you will be able to catch at least 1 Nastrond and your Stardiver with Lance Charge up. This also sets you up to immediately enter Life phase again right after your first one, assuming that you use High Jump and Mirage Dive every 30 seconds correctly. To be able to get a potentially another Nastrond while you still have Lance Charge, but more importantly, you get to catch your Dragon Sight buff for most of your second Life phase. This is an overall DPS increase over using Life phase as soon as possible. The only thing I will tell you though is never delay Life phase by not using Gerskogel. If you accidentally use Mirage Dive too early, just enter Life phase early anyways, as this is better than trying to delay Gerskogel. This is the only optimization part that is actually fairly difficult from a rotation standpoint. If you plan to practice this, the general rule is that if either Lance Charge or Dragon Sight has about 18 to 20 seconds left before it comes up, you should enter Life phase. If both cooldowns are longer than 23 to 25 seconds, you should delay Life phase by Mirage Diving after Gerskogel. Once again, this is the harder part of optimizing your damage. If you want to just always enter Life phase when it comes up, be my guest, but I did tell you how to expand your brain. Alright, so with all these convoluted explanations out of the way, the cooldowns you need to keep track of every 30 seconds are High Jump, Mirage Dive, and Gerskogel. When Gerskogel lights up, get ready to mash it like crazy to get 3 Nastrons in while in Life phase, and don't forget to use Stardiver. Life Surge comes up every 45 seconds. It should ideally be used on full thrust or Radiant thrust depending on when you time it and where you are in your rotation. Spine Shatter Dive comes up every minute, but this is the jump that you can save to get to the boss when you need to, as it does the least amount of damage of all of your jumps. Lance Charge comes up every 90 seconds. Dragon Sight and Dragonfire Dive come up every 120 seconds. And finally, Battle Litany comes up every 180 seconds, which means you should use it in tandem with every other Lance Charge. I won't forget to mention the other utility that you have at your disposal. Always remember, Arm's Length will prevent most knockback effects and can act as a tank cooldown if you somehow get aggro against generic mobs. Feint will debuff an enemy and can be used to help your party against heavy hitting attacks in high-end content. Bloodbath is your self-sustain tool to help ease your healer's workload, and Second Wind can also save you if everything's going to hell. Finally, Elusive Jump is your backflip tool that will probably send you into the death plane. Overall, Dragoon can be surprisingly complex. There are many cooldowns to keep track of as well as minor optimizations at your disposal for Life of the Dragon. While the core rotation is very static and relatively straightforward, it becomes completely unaligned if you miss a positional. I personally think that Dragoon is one of the harder jobs to pick up and be successful at due to being surprisingly punishing. But do not be discouraged, because the only way to be good at something is to be terrible at it first. You do not want to know how long it took me to get footage that didn't look like complete dirt. Now let's get out there and survive. Greetings, seasoned traveler. its editing chair here. Please check the link in the description for the written guide I referenced when figuring out the more complicated parts of this class. It was an absolute lifesaver. And the end here is going to be an outtake from when I tried to record the Skyrim intro at an improper frame rate. I will see you in my next video, which will probably be much spicier and less informative. Also, seizure warning for this Skyrim outtake.
What the fuck is going on?
Hey, you. Finally awake. Walked right into that Imperial ambush. Same as us. And over there.
Oh my god.
Stormcloaks. Skyrim.
What?
Empire's nice and lazy. They hadn't been looking for you. Could have stolen a horse and been halfway to Hammerfell.